A lot of people are going to be forced to make decisions perhaps that they wouldn't normally make, but it's get an expert on board, review country infrastructure, understand the strengths and weaknesses of a country, make sure that you are actively involved in looking at the factories yourselves if you don't have a good partner that's got vetted factories and vetted production.
Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome to this special episode of Clothing Culture. We've been receiving so many questions around this one particular theme, so we thought we would create an edition just to address this question, or a series of questions that we continue to receive around China.
Yeah, there's really no easy answers to most of the questions. First, the political tensions between China and the U.S. I don't think China wants that political tension. I don't think the U.S. really wants it because so much of our livelihood and production comes out of China, but it is what it is. And so we kind of manage that on a daily, monthly, weekly, whatever basis. And hopefully, the political leaders kind of see their way through these situations. Good business tries to manage itself around political situations, but it does exist. Second is Xinjiang cotton. There's a ban on Xinjiang cotton. Over 80% of the cotton in China is produced in the Xinjiang region. That doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. Does not look like there's a major shift in ideology on either side. So that's a real issue. COVID right now, the water's somewhat, at least as we see them on this side of the water, somewhat calm. When you're in a situation with 1.5, 1.6 billion people, and you're dealing with strains of COVID that become more and more contagious, that could flare up and create a lot of issues, not to mention tragedy that could occur in that country that could impact a lot of things. And then finally, shipping. Shipping is not intrinsically a China issue. It's been an issue globally from a number of manufacturing countries. But on the positive note, today, China's lead times on shipping are better, or lead times coming from China to the U.S. are better, and certainly costs are more reasonable. But it's a ongoing kind of point of view, and we've got to continue to manage those situations.
In previous episodes, we've addressed a lot of these common questions that are coming our way with regards to this topic. Today, we're going to take highlights from those previous episodes and touch base with some of the latest current information. The first question that we are hearing most commonly is, I want to move all my production. Can I move my production out of China right now? Bret, I'd like you to take that on.
No. I would say first, it depends on the size of your organization, the number of units, the particular category of product that you're producing. Small to medium companies that might be cotton rich, that's kind of a foregone conclusion today with the ban on Xinjiang cotton. There are other places to produce. For more established organizations with larger volumes, multiple categories and classifications, trying to manage all those things and get out of China is a much more challenging situation. I really believe that the answer is diversification. So while not every country does everything well, focusing on the benefits that China does provide. They've established an unbelievable infrastructure, some great mills close to factories, the ability to do amazing product. Use China for its benefits, and then look to other areas around the world to increase your percentages of business as it makes sense.
You bring up the topic of the Xinjiang cotton ban. And we do have an excellent episode that does that deep dive on this. That's season 2, episode 24, that really addressed it in a very timely manner. And as soon as that hit the news, we released an episode just days after, helping to provide some guidance on how to navigate those complexities. Why don't we take a listen to a clip from that episode? You can't just, shove 80% of the world's production into places that don't quite have that established infrastructure yet.
Sure.
What are some maneuvers that people can make to help them, carefully make some of those transitions?
The difficult part about that also for individuals that are kind of doing that themselves and don't already have an infrastructure for multi-country production, because some have really focused and continue to have a lot of their production in China. If you don't have a diversified portfolio today, you need to. At STARS, we ensure that we've got diversified portfolios of countries of manufacture to balance things like this in terms of production. And we've increased or decreased production in certain countries based upon all of these many, many things that are affecting the apparel industry today. But you've got due diligence. A lot of people are going to be forced to make decisions perhaps that they wouldn't normally make, but it's get an expert on board, review country infrastructure, understand the strengths and weaknesses of a country, make sure that you are actively involved in looking at the factories yourselves if you don't have a good partner that's got vetted factories and vetted production. Make sure that they're certified. Look at, the particular category of apparel that you're producing. Make sure that it fits within the country that you're focusing on. And then be cognizant that, as you mentioned before, this is sort of a math problem, that when you've got a portion of all these goods that are, in addition to people already exiting out of China for other reasons, tariffs or looking to diversify their portfolio, demand is already exceeding supply in many countries, and this is just going to further exacerbate that situation.
Right.
So you've got to be prepared for delayed production, unless you've got resource and planning in place to reserve production lines and ensure that there's some consistency or existing relationships. And I think you're going to look for some learning curves with new relationships, as everybody does. They don't always know your business. You haven't developed a relationship. They might have more solid relationships to people who already made that pivot.
Yeah.
So you've got to go down the path. You've got to make sure that you've got a portfolio, but
it certainly is becoming more competitive out there, with more people looking at these options. And, there are I can see some complications that would arise out of that. If all of these places are trying to go to these new factories, the new factories are going to make decisions of who they want to work with based on quantities and complexity of garments. So
Sure.
It's going to shift what's readily available and the options that are out there.
Yeah, you got to go in realistically. I think we've had a few calls of people saying, look, I want to near shore, and, there's parts that, hey, we're willing to pay a little bit more, but we want to work with smaller quantities and more difficult to sew garments, and we want a ton of flexibility. And, when the world is in this situation, that thought process, while it's healthy for your organization, might not align completely with a factory's thought process, especially when they can say, I can choose less complicated goods, that I have quicker production, therefore making me more money.
So basically, nothing's impossible. It's just going to cost you.
Your company.
It might cost you financially. It might compromise quality. It might take a little bit of time. All of this, of course, requires planning. Perhaps a more realistic option is diversification, as you mentioned. Let's talk a little bit about what that process is.
Yeah, the diversification process means you're going to potentially either increase volume in some of the factories you're currently working with, And that becomes a little more tricky when demand exceeds supply. So planning and communication with that factory is really important. But if you're going to look for new factories, I've never seen success about throwing the dart at the proverbial factory wall and it being a super
Right.
big success. I've heard of people book product without going to a factory. But look, you in many cases, you're investing a lot of dollars in production. And so you don't ever do things without really exploring that firsthand. And so I suggest visiting the factory more than once, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the particular factory or organization. There's certain ways to vet those factories that kind of are tried and true, looking at social certifications. And then really the in-depth thing is developing that relationship with the organization. That again takes some time. And so vetting a factory, there's a lot of multiple steps that take time. It's not as simple as just shifting to a new factory and hoping the production will occur.
That's right. It is complicated. And we did create an episode in our very first season, episode number 3, entirely dedicated to this very conversation of vetting, all of the critical information around that. So if you want a deeper dive on that, definitely check that episode out. Let's move on to our next question. Can we nearshore or onshore our production? We're seeing trends in this area. Target just announced and Columbia Sportswear just announced that they're investing in Central America. A lot of people are motivated to bring things closer to home.
Yeah, Kamala Harris is talking about the call to action for Northern Central America, et cetera. And, there's a lot of investment. Since 2021, I think there's been over $3 or $4 billion worth of investment in Central America. A number of organizations are investing a lot. Private enterprise is now committing another $600 million. Gap is investing another $150 million. There's a lot of conversation about moving to Central America. With our experience in Central America, mine going back almost 30 years, Central America, again, is one of those areas that have strengths and weaknesses. And so understanding those different strengths and weaknesses of that area is going to be very important. They also make up a very, very small percentage of the world's global production. So moving it from almost single-digit numbers to moving it to 40 or 50% is just unrealistic in a short amount of time. So people think they can move wholesale down into those those areas and make a dramatic shift in their pipeline and their production and nearshoring. This is not an overnight situation. This is going to be a long-term deal, and you don't want to be caught where supply is about this big, demand is this big, and you're all running to one area because obviously prices are going to skyrocket. Deliveries are going to push out, quality can become suspect. There's a lot of situations where, if an area heats up, there's reason to be cautious.
Yeah, on the surface, it sounds like a great idea, but certainly understand how it's not necessarily the overnight utopia everybody is hoping for. It requires a lot of planning, and again, that keyword diversification that we keep talking about. We do have an episode that talks about nearshoring for apparel manufacturing. It is episode 2, or season 2, episode 23. Let's take a listen. There are a lot of benefits to looking at this region. One of them that we've experienced a few times now is just the travel is so much easier. We can get there in a few hours and, easily come back home. And so looking at a trip to Central America versus going east, it's quite a time and cost savings. So I can see some of those benefits. Are there other benefits that you think people should consider as they're exploring this region?
Yeah, certainly. The U.S. Trade Department has allowed for duty-free imports as long as, a large majority of the product is built in those countries, and that can be a definite benefit. Sometimes the rising costs that are occurring in Central America times the productivity levels that are occurring, diffuse that benefit a little bit, but there is certainly a benefit to that. For some of the key operations down there, if companies are strategic about how they build and develop plans there, production can be done rather quickly, more on basics, of course. But, you can build 35, 45-day turns out of Central America on production, stocking gray, stocking dyed, and I'm talking more T-shirts, sweatshirts, more basic items. But that's great. A lot of people love to be able to react to business, and that's becoming more and more challenging in Asia, both near and far. So that's a benefit. The other thing, too, certainly is the transit times. So we've talked ad nauseum about all the issues that are going on today. And I don't think in freight, they're not going to go away anytime soon. And so when you're looking at really 75 to 90 days, including clearance out of Asia at the best, your ability to ship and clear in 9 to 10 days out of Central America seems drastically better, of course.
Of course, especially
Behind
for
the
those
scene.
who are more excited about chasing demand.
Well, I think in general, if you buy closer to business, maybe you make better decisions, hopefully. But I would say, in addition to that, the actual cost per container. So, costs are starting to, and I really put heavy quotation marks on this, stabilize in container costs. They had skyrocketed to $22,000, $24,000 a container when things got really nuts. Maybe we're $8,000 or $10,000 a container now on a 40-foot. And they might come down, but they're certainly nowhere close to where they were a couple of years ago. But out of Central America, your container costs are $3,000 to $4,000. So when you're amortizing shipments there, that cost is certainly better also. I think the desire to do business in the countries exists.
Yeah.
Also, I think our business is made of people, and there's a desire and an aggressiveness from the people that we've met they really want to change their lives. They want to improve their lives.
Help,
Sure.
After building relationships over the last couple of years, it's certainly something we've fallen in love with a lot of people there and want to see their lives improve.
Yeah, everywhere I've gone, good business solves a lot of issues if you can scale.
Yeah. What are some of the key challenges that you see still remaining in this region?
People want to transplant some of the things that they can do in Asia and Central America, and that's where the challenge lies, and especially where demand far exceeds supply. Mm-hmm. So everyone is looking south now. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to go south because they're like, for all the reasons we mentioned. The challenges you have are that business in the south has been built on commodity basics for a lot of years. And it makes sense. It's easiest to go through lines. You're maximizing your profit on each line. And so it's going to be challenging. Some of the conversations that we've had where they want to implement some challenging, difficult garments into a factory that's doing basics, and they want to have a ton of flexibility in terms of orders. Look, when demand far exceeds supply, factories aren't going to be super keen to do that. Mm-hmm. They're going to be focusing on the most efficient production possible that's going through there. There's also some limitations on the type of products that you can produce in the region and qualify for duty-free. So those are things to be aware of, too.
Yeah. Well, you always say evolution, not revolution.
Right.
So absolutely, there are some opportunities brewing that will help support a lot of nearshoring goals, but we always recommend moving slowly and thoughtfully, have a plan in place, and you don't have to just make a sudden move tomorrow.
Yeah, it's part of a portfolio. Exactly. When you diversify your stocks, you diversify your production similarly.
Yeah. Well, I am really getting the key word for this episode, #diversify. That is subtly, or not so subtly.
Intelligently diversify.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's take on our next question. And our final question of this episode, can we build our own factory? I love this idea. People are like, wow, there's so much money, it takes so much time, all this stuff. Maybe I just do it myself. Bret, this is something you actually have some personal experience in, and I'd love for you to answer that question.
Yeah, this comes back to the intelligent thing. I think, we as visionaries make a lot of mistakes over our life, and that becomes wisdom. But there was a period in '08, where diversification is always important in our business. Exploring new territories and areas are important, and we explored Ethiopia as an opportunity. I look back at that time with bittersweet memories. It was certainly very challenging because we not only moved into relatively new factories, and they were city-sized factories, some of the most vertical factories I have seen, 3,200 workers on the floor, remote areas, lots of development and investment by the development bank, but also a new area. You know, this was part of Africa, and Africa has its own unique set of challenges. And you know, we started when that factory was relatively new. They had a very, very competent staff of multinational consultants and managers and things like that running these factories. Ran some great production through there on test orders. Seemed like everything was going to go swimmingly well. And as I had millions of dollars in multiple containers heading into Djibouti to clear into Ethiopia, political situations arose, and they kicked out the majority of the staff that was making things work, the experts, and replaced that staff with completely untrained locals. I saw my life pass before my eyes, and I ended up spending almost 3 years in Ethiopia, kind of working with the locals, trying to get millions of units out. And owning your own factory is outrageously time, has large time demands. You have to realize that all those workers are full-time. You've got that overhead that's consistent. You've got to manage political situations. If politics change, like this case, or economic situations change, you own that factory. You're going to still be producing whether or not it makes sense. There's just massive investments in terms of owning a factory. And certainly for organizations that have a lot of scale and size and running consistent product, that certainly could be a good decision, but realize that you better have one hell of a team that's going to commit themselves to that factor of a period of time.
It's already trained in efficiency.
Yes. And an area that's somewhat stable. You know, I don't think there's a single country, including ours, that's considered stable today. We live in very interesting times, but, you know, doing a lot of research on and understanding what you're getting into is going to be very, very critical. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's certainly not for small to medium-sized, organizations.
Yeah, because it's a business like any other business at that point. Now you're also dedicated to finding other programs to produce in that factory.
If you can't fill them yourself.
Right, yeah. Wow. Well, so much to navigate through. If we can be of any help in any of these questions and beyond, please feel free to reach out to us at Stars Design Group. And make sure to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Cultures so that we can help answer any of your questions in the industry. Thank you.